courthouse records were supposed to have been destroyed. Everyone said so. The Great Fire of 1865 had consumed the entire Henrio County building. They claimed, turning decades of Virginia's documented shame into ash and smoke that drifted over the James River, carrying secrets away forever. The official story was neat, final. A tragic accident, a clean slate. But in the damp, earth-smelling basement of what used to be the old clerk's office annex, behind a load-bearing wall that had inexplicably collapsed during renovations in the sweltering summer of 1973, two workers found something that shouldn't exist. Something that defied history, that mocked the tidy narrative of accidental loss. It wasn't just hidden. It was entombed. A solid iron strongbox, the size of a small trunk, its surface pitted with rust, but its lock and hinges still stubbornly intact. It had been sealed within the brickwork, mortar smoothed over it with a care that spoke of deliberate, frantic concealment. The men, their faces pale under the glare of their work lights, didn't open it. They felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement air. They called their foreman, who called the police, who called a county archivist. When the lock was finally drilled open, the smell that wafted out was of old paper, camphor, and something else, the faint metallic scent of fear, preserved for over a century. Inside were papers that had not just survived, but had been deliberately preserved. Deliberately hidden from the flames everyone claimed had taken everything. They were personal, intimate, and damning. Not the dry, legalistic official records, but the raw, pulsing nerve of history. Letters written in a trembling hand, diary entries stained with what looked like old tears, sworn testimonies that were never meant to be heard by a court, and photographs. Daguerreotypes from the early 1840s, their silvered surfaces capturing images so haunting they seemed to suck the air from the room. The photographs showed children, 23 of them captured across a span of 5 years. All infants or toddlers, all with the same startling, unnatural emerald green eyes that stared out from the past with an unsettling awareness. All with the same pale, wheat blonde hair, fine as silk. All born, according to the meticulous notes paper-clipped to each image, to enslaved women on plantations in Henrio and Chesterfield counties. The contrast was a visceral shock. Small bodies clad in the rough, humble cloth of the quarters, but with facial features, a bone structure, that looked like they'd been lifted from a European portrait gallery. The eyes were what stopped your heart. Not blue, not gray, but a vivid, gemstone green, bright and clear and absolutely unmistakable. A brand, a signature written in iris and cornea. Beside each photograph, written in the same careful, looping script, were names, dates of birth, plantation names, and the mother's name. And at the bottom of each note, a single word, underlined each time, his. The woman who first cataloged these documents, a young archivist named Miriam Vance, felt the world tilt on its axis. She brought them to a historian at the University of Virginia, a woman named Dr. Eleanor Hayes, known for her steel-trap mind and unflinching focus on Virginia's antebellum shadows. Dr. Hayes spent 6 months in a state of near-sleepless verification. She cross-referenced every name with plantation ledgers, birth registries smuggled out by freedmen, land deeds, personal diaries of neighboring families. Everything checked out. Every detail was corroborated. The plantations were real. The mothers were listed as property. The birth dates aligned. It was all terrifyingly, incontrovertibly real. And when she finally published her preliminary findings in a small, respected academic journal, the response from the wider historical community was a deafening, brittle silence. Not debate, not outrage, not even dismissive critique. Just silence. It was the silence of a room where someone has named the unspeakable thing everyone has secretly agreed to ignore. Because what do you do with evidence of something so systematic, so coldly deliberate, that even 130 years later, it feels easier to let the dust settle back over it? To pretend the iron box had never been found? But it was found. And it did happen. In the rolling tobacco counties of central Virginia, between 1839 and 1844, 23 children were born with emerald eyes and blonde hair. 23 children who looked nothing like their mothers. 23 children whose very existence was evidence of a crime that had no name under Virginia law. Because in 1840, enslaved women were not persons. They were chattel, property. And you cannot commit a crime against property. Before we go further into this shadow, I need you to do something. Subscribe to Truth Fear right now. Hit that notification bell because the stories we unearth here, the ghosts we invite to speak, they have a way of reaching out to those who listen. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What city, what state? Now, let's pull back the curtain on what truly happened in those Virginia counties. The truth is more calculated and more terrifying than you can imagine. The story doesn't begin with an overseer's raised eyebrow or gossip at a county fair. It begins in the clinging, pre-dawn dark of an April morning in 1839, in a cabin on a plantation called Fairview, with a woman named Ruth. At 31, she was old for a first-time mother in the quarters, but this was her second child. She held the newborn girl, the afterbirth still being cleared by the midwife, and understood with a cold, sinking certainty that her life had just been severed into a before and an after. Not just because of what the baby looked like, though that was a shock that stole the breath from her lungs, but because she knew. She knew the exact moment of conception. She knew the smell of the room, the pattern of the wallpaper she'd fixed her eyes upon, the weight of the silence that followed. She knew who the father was, and she knew, with a despair so complete it felt like peace, that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, she could ever do about it. Ruth had been born in Richmond, sold south to Fairview when she was 19, separated from her mother and 3 sisters in a transaction at Shockoe Bottom that took less time than haggling for a mule. For 12 years, she had mastered the art of survival at Fairview, the back-breaking rhythm of tobacco, the sly kindnesses that could be traded, the specific footsteps of each overseer to avoid, the way to make herself useful enough to be kept, invisible enough to be left alone. She'd been paired with Daniel, a good, quiet man worn down by the fields, and they had a daughter, Sarah, who was the image of them both. Dark eyes, dark skin, dark curly hair. This new baby should have been the same. But the child in her arms had skin the color of fresh cream. A fine, pale down of blonde hair dusted her scalp. And her eyes, when they flickered open, God, those eyes, a green like deep forest moss, like a jewel stolen from a crown, an impossible green. The midwife, an old woman named Patience who had seen everything, said nothing. She cleaned the infant, cut the cord, wrapped her in clean, rough cloth, and placed her in Ruth's arms. Her wrinkled hands lingered for a second on Ruth's, and the look that passed between them was a whole conversation of horror and understanding. I know, we both know, and if we value our lives, we will never, ever speak it. Daniel came in an hour later, smelling of sweat and earth. He'd been at the far edge of the property, hadn't heard. He pushed the cabin door open with a tired shoulder, a faint smile ready for his new child. He stopped 3 feet from the pallet. His eyes went from the bundle in Ruth's arms, to Ruth's ashen face, and back to the baby. His mouth worked, but sound failed him. The smile died, replaced by a dawning, terrible comprehension. That's not mine. The words were flat, final, like a stone dropping into a well. She is, Ruth whispered, the lie tasting like ash. She has to be. Look at her, Ruth. His voice was a strained rasp. Look at her eyes. I haven't been with anyone else. You know that. In your heart, Then how do you explain this? He asked, gesturing weakly at the baby, his hand trembling. The silence that swelled between them was a living thing, suffocating and thick. Daniel stood there, swaying slightly as if the ground had turned to mud beneath him. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. He didn't come back that night or the next. By week's end, he had petitioned the overseer for a transfer to a different work gang, a different cabin. He erased himself from their lives as thoroughly as if he'd never been in them. Ruth named her daughter Grace. The name felt like a plea to a God who seemed to have abandoned this corner of Virginia. And as Grace grew, healthy, alert, unervingly beautiful, her features became a constant, silent accusation. She was a porcelain doll misplaced in the dirt and sweat of the quarters. The other enslaved people didn't know how to look at her. Some averted their eyes, superstitious. Others stared with a mixture of pity and unease. A few older women cornered Ruth, their voices low and urgent. "Has someone been both airin' you, child? You seen someone lurkin'?" Ruth's answer was always a numb shake of the head, a murmured, "I don't know, I can't explain it." But that was the lie she had to live. Ruth knew. She remembered the night with a clarity that was its own kind of torture. December, the harvest over, the main house buzzing with preparations for a Christmas party. She'd been pulled from the quarters to help clean. She'd been on her knees, scrubbing a hallway floor long past midnight, her knuckles raw and bleeding, when his shadow fell over her. Jonathan Blackwell, the owner's second son, 34, unmarried, with a reputation for idleness and drink that was tolerated as a gentleman's vice. He smelled of whiskey and expensive tobacco. He didn't grab her, not at first. He just blocked her path. His smile didn't reach his cold green eyes. "Leaving so soon?" he'd asked, his voice soft. When she tried to sidestep him, his hand shot out and caught her wrist. His grip was deceptively gentle, then tight as an iron manacle. What followed was a blur of terror and dissociation. A side room, a door clicking shut, the sound of the key turning freezing the blood in her veins. His voice, still calm, almost conversational. "Don't fight. It'll be worse if you fight. Just be still." And Ruth, a master of survival, had obeyed. She'd left her body, floating somewhere near the ceiling, watching the scene below with detached horror until it was over. He'd straightened his waistcoat, told her to return to the quarters, and warned, "Not a word, to anyone." Then he was gone, as if dismissing a servant. 9 months later, Grace was born, her father's emerald eyes staring up at her mother. Now, holding her daughter, Ruth made a vow. She would love this child, protect her with every fiber of her being. But she would take the name of the father to her grave. To speak it was to invite annihilation. The pattern was just beginning, and someone else was starting to notice. But is he a seeker of justice? Or something else? Don't go anywhere. Grace was 6 months old when the second emerald-eyed child was born. This time at a plantation called Riverside, 8 miles east. The mother was Hannah, 24, a field hand. A boy, the same impossible combination. Hannah's reaction was a raw, screaming hysteria that had to be physically stifled by the midwife. Her partner, Jacob, took one look and vanished into the night, never to return to their cabin. Hannah refused to name or nurse the baby for 3 days, until an older woman forced a terrible truth upon her. That child is a fact. He exists. You can let him die and be punished for it, or you can feed him and live with the ghost in his eyes. She named him Thomas, and she fed him, but the love was buried under a mountain of resentment and trauma. The third birth came in January 1840 at Meadowbrook. A girl. The mother, Esther, 19, worked in the main house. Her recorded partner, Moses, didn't scream or argue. He simply walked off the plantation that night. They found him 3 days later, half frozen and mute, 20 miles away. He never spoke of the child again. The whispers began to travel, slithering along the James River from landing to landing, through the secret network of kinship and communication that thrived beneath the master's gaze. 2, now 3, all the same, like they're marked. By the summer of 1840, there were 6 children across 6 plantations with the same emerald brand. And in the refined drawing rooms of the planters, over brandy and cigars, the matter was discussed in hushed, embarrassed tones. It was scandalous, yes, distasteful, but not illegal. A nuisance, not a crime. The consensus was to look away, to let the strange fruit fall and be absorbed into the property rolls. But one man couldn't look away. William Carter, owner of Ashland Plantation, was a man tormented by a conscience in a place that had no use for one. Educated, widely read, he believed in slavery as an economic pillar but was haunted by its moral abyss. When his meticulous overseer, Thomas Reed, laid out the pattern, the dates, the plantations, the mother's identical stories, Carter felt a chill that wasn't from the evening air. Reed, ever observant, had noted a common thread in the background of each tragedy. the presence of Jonathan Blackwell for a visit, a hunt, a party, always roughly 9 months before each birth. Carter was trapped. He had the mind of a prosecutor but lived in a world with no law to apply. He decided to document, to bear witness. He began visiting the mothers, using business pretexts to gain access to the quarters. He found Ruth at Fairview, hanging laundry while Grace played nearby, a tiny, blonde beacon of truth. "I want to understand," Carter said gently. "I want to help." Ruth's laugh was a short, sharp, bitter sound. "Help? How, sir? You gonna make my daughter free? You gonna arrest a white man on a slave woman's word?" She looked at him, her eyes hard as flint. "The truth is, his name is Jonathan Blackwell. He locked a door and told me not to fight. I didn't fight because I wanted to see the sunrise. Write that down, sir. Write it down good. But it won't change a thing. It won't protect the next one." Her words, and the identical stories he heard from Hannah, Esther, and the others, carved a hollow in Carter's soul. He compiled a dossier, dates, testimonies, a map of Jonathan Blackwell's movements. It was a perfect, airtight case for a crime that did not exist in the legal lexicon. He took his evidence to Edmund Blackwell, Jonathan's father, patriarch of Fairview. The meeting was short. "My son is not a rapist," Edmund stated, his back to Carter as he gazed out the window. "These are the lies of property, designed to cause trouble. Repeat them publicly, Mr. Carter, and I will ruin you. Do you understand?" Carter understood. The law was a wall, and he was beating his fists against it. The system is sealed, airtight, but pressure is building in the darkness. What happens when the powerless find a voice? The answer will shock you. The births continued. The emerald-eyed children numbered 12, then 15. The women, drowning in isolation, began to find each other. Furtive meetings at a small church on Richmond's outskirts, Mount Zion, pastored by a free black man from Philadelphia, Reverend Isaiah Grant. He saw their shared, haunted look, the strange children they shielded. When Ruth finally broke down and told him everything, Grant made a dangerous decision. The law was closed to them, but the court of public opinion, that was a different battlefield. "Your voices don't carry here," he told the small group of mothers who agreed to speak. "But mine can. I can write." Through the summer of 1842, Reverend Grant interviewed them, recording their testimonies with sacred care. He wrote a searing essay, A System That Protects Monsters, naming Jonathan Blackwell and detailing the systematic violation. He sent it to abolitionist papers in Philadelphia and Boston. When it was published, the reaction in the North was outrage. In Virginia, it was volcanic fury, directed not at Blackwell, but at Grant. He was the agitator, the liar, the threat. The system flexed its muscle. Mount Zion Church was burned to the ground one windless night. Reverend Grant fled for his life to Philadelphia. The women were left more alone than ever, the silence closing back over them like water over a stone. But the pattern had one last, grim iteration. In August of 1844, at Fairview, a woman named Margaret gave birth to the 23rd emerald-eyed child, a girl. Margaret looked at her daughter and uttered a prophecy that rang with cold finality. "This is the last one he'll make." 3 days later, Jonathan Blackwell was found dead in his bed at Fairview. The doctor, a family friend, cited heart failure. The enslaved people in the quarters knew better. They whispered about Margaret, about a certain bitter herb that grew by the creek, about a cup of tea delivered to the main house. They whispered about a justice that operated outside the law, a final, desperate accounting. Margaret was sold to Georgia 2 weeks later, separated forever from her infant daughter. The birth stopped. Jonathan Blackwell was buried. The scandal, with no one left to fan its flames, slowly smothered under the weight of time and willful forgetting. William Carter, defeated, locked his comprehensive dossier, every testimony, every date, every damning connection, into an iron strongbox. He hid it in his basement, a truth too dangerous for his time. He died after the Civil War, a world later. The box passed to his daughter, who, horrified, hid it away again. It sat there, a silent, ticking historical bomb, for 101 years. until the wall came down. But the story that emerged was only the beginning. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about the shadows it casts on the present. And those shadows are long and they have eyes. What did Dr. Eleanor Hayes discover when she tracked the descendants? The answer is more unsettling than you can fathom. When construction workers found the box in 1973 and it landed on Dr. Hayes' desk, the past exploded into the present. Her 6 months of verification only confirmed the horror. But her academic article was met with that chilling silence. So she dug deeper. She tracked the children. Grace, sold to New Orleans at 12, eventually freed, her emerald eyes staring out from photographs found by her granddaughter. Thomas, sold south, lost to history. Others, scattered by the fancy trade. Their light skin and features making them commodities for a particular kind of horror. Dr. Hayes found descendants. People living in the 1970s who carried the emerald eyes, the blonde hair, the unspoken family trauma. She brought them the evidence, the photographs, the names. For some, it was a gut-wrenching relief, a name for the family ghost. For others, it was an unwanted excavation of pain. In 1978, she organized a gathering in Richmond. Descendants of the mothers and the children came together. They saw their own faces in the 140-year-old daguerreotypes. They read the testimonies of their great-great-grandmothers. They wept, they raged, they finally spoke the unspeakable. One descendant, a schoolteacher from Atlanta, stood before the group. "My great-great-grandmother Hannah never recovered," she said. "They said she died of a broken heart. It wasn't her heart. It was her soul. Knowing this truth now, it doesn't fix it. But it makes it real. It honors her survival." Dr. Hayes' subsequent book, Emerald Eyes, faced legal threats from Blackwell descendants trying to suppress the story. They failed. The evidence was too solid, the photographs too real, the DNA now traceable in living people. In 1991, a state historical marker was placed near Fairview. It was vandalized repeatedly but always replaced. The legacy is a complex, living wound. The descendants carry the genetic marker of the violator and the unimaginable strength of the violated. They carry the knowledge that their ancestors were evidence of a crime the law refused to see. The system that protected Jonathan Blackwell is gone, but its echo remains in the trauma passed down through generations. The story of the Iron Box is a testament to one horrifying fact. Under that system, such crimes were not a bug, but a feature. Jonathan Blackwell was the system working perfectly. What makes this case unique is not that it happened, but that it was meticulously documented, hidden, found, and remembered. The truth survived the fire, the wall, the silence, and the years. Ruth never saw Grace again after she was sold at 12. She died free but haunted. Yet her testimony, her X on a page, survived. The children, the 23, lived and had children of their own. Their existence is the ultimate rebuttal to silence. So we are left with the questions that linger in the quiet after the story is told. What is justice when the law is an accomplice? It can look like a published essay, a hidden box of papers, a historical marker. It can look like a mother's fierce, silent love. And sometimes, in the darkest of nights, it might look like a bitter cup of tea. The system tried to bury this truth in ash and brick and forgetfulness. But some truths are like those emerald eyes. They won't stop staring back at you. What do you think true justice looks like for a crime the law refused to acknowledge? Could it ever be enough? The conversation continues below. Share your thoughts. If this story of buried truth and resilience matters to you, hit like, share this with someone who isn't afraid of history's ghosts, and subscribe to Truth Fear for more journeys into the forgotten dark. I'll see you in the next video. But remember, some histories don't stay in the past. They wait, patient as stone, for the wall to crack.